Yes, that is right. Welcome, everybody, on in to the Saturday Night Network for another edition of our countdown of the greatest cast members of all time. We have had a monumental task to give you the results of your fan voted, interested. I don't know what I'm saying, but I'm very excited to be here. I'll take it over. We're live. We've had a monumental task to give you the results week after week and be able to explain to you why 50 through 25 are the greatest cast members of all time. And I'm going to do this a third time. All right. I know we're live, but here we go. Bill. Okay. One more time. We've had a monumental task here week after week to give you the greatest cast members of all time, 50 all the way down to 27. And I am so excited to be back here to reveal 27, 26, 25 as we get to some of the greatest in SNL history. And I'm excited to do that with two very special guests tonight. And that would be, first up, my man, Bill Kenny. Bill, welcome on in.
John, we don't go on the air because we're ready. We go on because it's 8:05 on a Thursday, as Lauren says.
So many shows in the week, and it's just like like the end of the week, but this is what happens. But yes, believe it or not, we have a great show for you tonight, and I promise you, I have a lot of things to say, and I'm just so excited to tell you all about it. But very excited as well to bring in one of the best SNL podcasters there is, and that would be Thomas Senna from the SNL Hall of Fame and Pop Culture 5. So Thomas Senna, how are you?
Yes, doing great. Your energy's rubbing off on me, John. It's great. Like, I'm loving this, John. Just this giddy John Schneider that we're seeing. You're making me giddy now.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. You guys are so nice. Yeah, no, I'm usually very polished, but for me, it's just, I guess, yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited about the three cast members we're going to talk about today, because the truth is that as I was looking at the list, and we're really getting into it now, we're really getting to some of I was telling you guys in the pre-show, we're getting towards the point where some of these people you could start to argue, like, are they the greatest cast member of all time? Maybe not today, maybe next week, maybe the week after, but we're really getting close to that. And that's the point where I just think these shows are going to get very intense as we get into some really good debates on it all. And I think we have so far. So I'm very excited to talk about the three cast members that we are revealing tonight. If you're live with us in the chat, you got to let us know what you think of the cast members that we're revealing. Did they get the right spot on the list? We've been looking through your comments each and every week. And if you're watching after the fact, let us know on the YouTube channel as well to tell us your thoughts on the list so far. We always appreciate those types of feedback. All right. So Bill Kenny, I started this countdown with you, I think 6 or 7 weeks ago, and we got to talking about what makes a great cast member. And you told me that you made your own list of the greatest cast members of all time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up the current list up until this point, up until we get 50 through basically 28, I believe is where we're at right now. And I'm going to ask you to give me your thoughts on how the list has panned out so far. Does it match your list? Are some people too high, some people too low? Tell us what you think. And listeners, we want to know your thoughts as well. So, Bill, what do you think?
Okay, so I've been listening obviously every week as you've been going on here, and there are definitely some people that are way too low. I'm looking at you, Bill Murray, Jane Curtin, John Lovitz. But overall, I think this has been a pretty good, accurate list of where these people fall. Obviously, it is objective. It depends on where you feel, what time you were born. Like somebody like me who's been watching since the 80s, some of these guys hit harder than they might for somebody born in the 90s or the early 2000s. So, it is obviously very tough to nail down, but I think overall the fans have done a really good job. It just shows how smart our fans are, especially the listeners of the podcast.
100%. Yeah, I think that these are some really interesting choices that everybody has made. When we started the list, I didn't know how it would all pan out, and I'm pretty happy with it. There's obviously some that I think deserve to be higher, and some I have mentioned deserve to be lower, but we've had so much fun talking about them. Thomas, for you, I know you made your own list. I've seen you in the chat week after week. So what do you think about the choices the listeners have made so far, 50 through 28?
Yeah, I think there's a couple. It's mostly positive. There's a couple glaring ones. Daryl Hammond at 33. I think he should be a lot higher. I have him top 20. I had him 18th on my list. So 33 is a bit of a slight. Of course, Bill Murray, I had him 16th, and that might even be a little low, but I thought 16th was kind of fair for myself. But 28th here seems a little much. But I think everybody did a pretty good job. I'm one of the resident, along with Sammy K, one of the resident Vanessa Bayer super fans. And I actually think this is fair. I was really happy that she made it in the top 30. You would think that I would have her freakishly high. I have her 25th on my list, and she's 29th. So pretty close. Coming from a Vanessa Bear super fan, I was really, really happy about this. But I think everybody's done a pretty good job. I'm not surprised that somebody like David Spade made the list. I think we're going to see a lot of name recognition, maybe get some bumps a little bit. So that's not a surprise. For the most part, good job, everybody.
Totally agree. Well, I'm going to read through the list so far, just in case you forgot who was on it and you were listening on audio and not watching. We did put it up on screen for you, but here we go from 50 all the way through 28. Kevin Nealon, Joe Piscopo, David Spade, Mikey Day, Tracy Morgan, Chevy Chase, Jimmy Fallon, Bowen Yang, Martin Short, and Sherry O'Terry. At 40, Ego Wodem, then Taron Killam, Chris Parnell, John Lovitz, Beck Bennett, Jane Curtin, Seth Meyers, Daryl Hammond, Anna Gasteyer, and Bobby Moynihan. And then we have gone into the top 30 as of last week, where we revealed Tim Meadows, Vanessa Bayer, and Bill Murray. And just in case you missed our conversations last week, Bill Murray was highly, highly debated when we posted the results on social media. People were freaking out and saying, whoa, Bill should be much, much higher. Well, you should have voted for him, because I agree. I think that he should be higher. He's number one on my ranking so far. Will he stay number one after this show? Because I think we have some really special people to talk about. So Bill Kenny, Thomas Senna, you guys excited to bring up our 3 cast members we're revealing tonight?
Yes, let's do this.
All right, let's do this. Okay, coming up next on the list at number 27 is somebody who I always enjoyed getting to see on screen. Every time she was there, she made me laugh. I think an incredible, incredible character player in the history of the show, has one of the greatest characters of all time as voted by you, the fans. And that would be the one, the only, Rachel Dratch, coming in at 27 on this countdown. 7 seasons on the show. She joins officially in episode 3 of 1999-2000 season. Will stay until 2006. 137 episodes at the show. That's good for 26th all time. 465 sketches, 35th all time. You may know her best, and this is what I really knew her best for when I was a casual young SNL fan, and that would be Debbie Downer, which was just took over the world in the early 2000s. That was a huge, huge monumental sketch for her, but really not the only thing. The Lovers, the Boston Teens. I'm going to ask the guys to tell me some of their favorite moments from Rachel, but truly, truly a powerhouse. When she joined the show, she joins this group of women that started to take over the show. And I do feel like sometimes her name gets lost in the mix, but she deserves some praise. So Bill, what are your thoughts on Rachel Dratch here at number 27?
So I said everything in the introduction just to say this. This may be the biggest variation I've had. I had her at 56 on my list.
Wow.
And yeah, now I love Rachel, but when you start to break it down, especially with all the people that you just showed on the list, how is she ahead of Anna, Vanessa, Sherry, Jane? That's really a difficult thing. Then you look at the micro of it, and she really only has that one character that stands out as the main character. Now, she was second banana in a lot of stuff in The Lovers, in Boston Teens, Deep House Dish, Wake Up Wakefield, things like that. So this is where, I mean, again, you're parsing so many different things at this point. You're still talking about an all-time great cast member. I just don't think she's quite this high.
Interesting. I want to let Thomas go and give us his thoughts on Rachel Dratch, but I also would love to continue that conversation about talking her versus some of the other women we've spoken about so far, because I don't know that that I wouldn't put her ahead of some of the ones we've talked about, and I'll explain to you why. But Thomas, go ahead. What are your thoughts on Rachel?
Yeah, I'm more inclined to agree with Bill on this one. I love Rachel. I had her in my top 50. I had her number 46. And looking at the other 45 people that I put ahead of her, I stand by that. And Bill brings up good points. One thing good, some good things that I can say about Rachel. I really enjoyed her. She pops on screen. She brought a lot of really fun, weird energy, which fit perfectly with that era. There's a lot of weird, fun sketches in that era, and Rachel fit in perfectly. She was always committed. So like one thing about Rachel is she was never going to phone it in. She was so committed to her characters. But just she had some good one-offs, but just the body of work for me wasn't quite there, even though she was fun to watch. I think there were, in my opinion, at least 45 other cast members who I say maybe had a better body of work and were maybe equally as fun to watch on screen. But no slight to Rachel. I mean, I think she deserves to be on this list. 27 is pretty surprising. I didn't think she would make it this high. And although all the really talented women that Bill mentioned, I would all have them all ahead of Rachel as well.
Okay, let's debate this because I think that she is definitely a little high, but not so high that I think that she wouldn't have made my top 40, I'd say. Probably maybe somewhere between 35 and 40, something like that. I have to see where she'll end up ultimately on the list, and I'll reveal my rankings at the end of the show. But would I put her ahead of Jane Curtin? Definitely not. Would I put her ahead of Anna Gasteyer and Vanessa Bayer? I think she's close. I really do. I think that like her characters are probably stronger. Look, Debbie Downer, like I said, fifth greatest character in SNL history as voted by the fans. The lover sketch that she does with Will Ferrell, super popular. Like she is able to be such a great scene partner, very similar to the way that Anna Gasteyer can be, like working off of Molly Shannon. Boston Teens that she does with Jimmy Fallon. I know that's a debatable, you have to really like Jimmy to love the sketch, but I do think that they're so strong together. There's so many episodes where they kick off the show with a Boston teen sketch, and she really, really helps carry that sketch. Sheldon from Wake Up Wakefield, where she does that with Maya Rudolph. Like, I just think that she has a really, really strong resume of characters that she does working off one other person. She's really great in a twosome. And I also think if you're talking about debating her versus, let's say, Vanessa or Anna, I also think Rachel's a really strong impressionist. Like she does some really good impressions throughout her time at the show as well. I don't know. Look, I'm not going to say that she's in the upper pantheon of greats, but I do think that she's comparable to those other two that we definitely spoke about. Either of you have some thoughts?
Well, I mean, impressions, I push back a little bit on that because like looking through her list of impressions, I don't know what you would put as an all-time great impression. Her Barbara Walters, I mean, she was following a very tough act with Sherry. And I mean, Callista Flockhart, which I believe was her very first sketch, that was pretty good. But that's about it. I mean, I don't know. Helen Thomas, who was kind of, I don't know how many people would even know who that is at this point. The White House reporter who was like 90 years old and worked with like 8 presidents. She did a really good job with that as well. But there's not a lot of impressions that I would be like, yeah, that's a Rachel Dratch.
I'd say like her Drew Barrymore would probably be like a good example. I look, is she as strong of an impressionist as Anna Gasteyer with Martha Stewart or Vanessa Bayer with like Jennifer Aniston, let's say? Like I'd say probably not. Like there's probably like a higher ceiling on them with impressions, but I think Rachel's ceiling is higher with characters. So like for me, it's sort of like half a dozen of one, half a dozen of the other. I don't know. What do you think, Thomas?
Yeah, I think you mentioned Debbie Downer. I wonder if that's people remember Debbie Downer more because the first sketch, which I love, no matter how many times I see it, it makes me crack up. And I watched it today and just cracked up all the same. But I think people remember that one because of the breaking, because of that first sketch and how it went down. But as a character, it was kind of just okay. And she did 6 other Debbie Downers after that first one, and there were diminishing returns. I think The Lovers, though, is one that I really highlighted as something that I like. So as far as you're right, she was a wonderful scene partner with Will Ferrell. She definitely worked well with other people, with Jimmy Fallon when she played one of the Boston Teens with Denise. But yeah, I think I agree with Bill too. As far as impressions go, like that the Callista Flockhart one, that was a lot of that was a sight gag, and I know she did okay with that impression, but a lot of that was on the strength of like some sight gag that they did with Callista being skinny and all that. Rachel, I loved her when she was on the show, but there's just so many talented people on the show. 27th is surprising. I could see top 40, like if somebody had her like with you, John, 35 to 40. I think that seems perfectly reasonable. But compared to Anna Gasteyer and Vanessa Bayer, I can't do it.
Okay, that's fair. I mean, and also we can't forget about her coming back and paying Amy Klobuchar, I think,
Yeah.
a few times. But look, I'll talk about the numbers here from Rachel, which was 3.27 sketches per episode, good for 49th all time. She also has like a very interesting trajectory as far as like the amount of sketches in a given season. She comes in basically 10th, ninth in our first 3 seasons, like really not very strong on the show, and then has like a pretty meteoric rise as she continues throughout the last few seasons of her career. Jumps up to 5th, 6th, 4th, and then 3rd. In season 31, she is 3rd on the cast in sketch appearances, which is pretty high. Look, like I said, I think she's an above average cast member, no doubt. Do I think she's one of the greats of the greats? Probably not, but I do think that her numbers are decent. And like I said, I think like was she meant for SNL 100%, because I think she's a really good character actress. I think she's really good on the show. I think her numbers are okay. Legacy, I think she takes some hits because I do think that she existed at a time where SNL wasn't at its greatest, and there was a few other women that come in, like specifically like Maya Rudolph comes in at the same time. Tina Fey is there. Amy Poehler comes in. She sort of has like I think very brief crossover with Kristen Wiig. Like, so the for me, like she's sort of like underrated because of all the people around her. So I think her legacy isn't as strong as them. I would say out of the 3 that we were talking about, Vanessa Bayer, Anna Gasteyer, and Rachel Dratch, Anna to me has probably the strongest legacy. But I do think that Rachel competes with them. So overall, I think that there's a case to be made for her. Rolling Stone had her ranked at 16th in SNL 40. Bill, what do you think of that?
Oh, Rolling Stone, you never fail to disappoint. 16. Like, did they make this in 1978 and then went in a time machine? Like, no, I'm sorry. Sorry, no.
Yeah. Well, they mentioned her episode with Lindsay Lohan where she goes from playing Harry Potter and then switching over to Debbie Downer, and they say that was one of the greatest. I don't know, very, very obscure reference. I'll also mention, by the way, I forgot to say last week on the podcast, and some people were asking me, Bill Murray was at 6th on the Rolling Stone chart, which I know that some of you may agree with based on what was said, but I think that's a little high. But either way, I thought that was interesting. I do want to ask you guys if, through your research onto Rachel Dratch, as we were having this conversation, if there were any standout moments for you that may be underrated. So Thomas, do you have any of those?
Yeah, I do. From season 28, which was a great season for Rachel. I think that's when she took her jump and she was featured a lot. She was in a lot of really good sketches. This was from season 28, episode 4. It was a game night sketch. And it's where Rachel and she's at a friend's house at game night. She's with her boyfriend, played by Eric McCormick from Will and Grace, and they're playing this secret word game. And she just kind of goes nuts. She gets so competitive. She starts yelling at her boyfriend, yelling at everybody. She ends up by the end, like running through a wall. She has this great unhinged look on her face by the end. And this is a great example, this game night sketch, of a lot of what I enjoyed about Rachel. She can go from 0 to 10 quickly. It was a very quirky character. If I was to sum up what I enjoyed about Rachel Dratch on SNL, I would point people toward Game Night. That's season 28, episode 4.
Bill, what about you? Are there any sketches from your research into Rachel Dratch's career that you would want to mention to the listeners?
There's none better to me than Fun Friends Club. This is with Ray Liotta and Jimmy Fallon and a bunch of little kids. And Rachel is in this Barney type show. And she's 12 years old, but she's developed over the summer tremendously. And she's jumping around and it's just very, very uncomfortable. This is actually one of Jimmy's best sketches too, I think, because he's playing the straight man and trying to keep it on track as Ray Liotta, as the dinosaur, I believe he was, or the dragon, was trying to derail the whole thing and tell Jimmy to send her home because she clearly didn't belong on this kid show anymore. And she was just wonderfully played in this. So yeah, that would be my favorite Rachel sketch.
Yeah, it is interesting that sometimes like Rachel has the ability to play like over the top and also really diminutive And I think that's like a very unique characteristic of a cast member on the show. I think her small, at least what appears on screen, because I've never met her in person, I think her like small frame and stature is something that she like really makes up for in her quirky personality. And I think that's why she resonates with a lot of people. So look, I'm a fan of Rachel Dratch. I really, really admire and enjoyed her time on the show. So yeah, I could see the arguments on both sides. I think this is probably an interesting debate that I would love to know from the chat if you think she's too high, too low, or just right. Bill, anything else you would like to say about Rachel Dratch?
The only other thing is, like, we're debating the greatest of all time. This is not a slight on her at all. I think she's
For sure.
fantastic. Every time she came back to the show in cameos, I was excited. She did a great Amy Klobuchar. So yeah, she is a great, but not a number 27 great.
All right, fair enough. Thomas, for you, final words on Rachel Dratch.
No, I love Rachel Dratch. When I put her at 46 or whatever on my list, that wasn't a slight to her. I didn't have to plug my nose and say, oh, I guess I'll slot Rachel here. Like I kind of looked at it and was like, do I really? And then I looked at the other people like, I guess this makes sense, but it probably doesn't reflect how much I enjoy Rachel Dratch. I read her autobiography as well, and it's really good. You should go check that out if you're into SNL books and biographies and autobiographies and stuff. Rachel has a good one. I suggest that. So I really am a Rachel Dratch fan. She really did pop off the screen.
Fair enough. Well, there you go. 27 for Rachel Dratch as you voted. And now you have to tell us where you think she should have ended up on the list. Okay, guys, I'm excited for this next one to talk about. This is a really, really big name here in SNL history, and one that I think that the listeners are going to have another strong debate of, because I'd say one of the most popular cast members in the history of the show. But were they one of the greatest cast members of all time? I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation to have. So let me bring up, from 5 seasons at the show, at number 26, Adam Sandler comes here at 26. He was a cast member, I would say like almost, I guess like 4.5 seasons. He joins officially in February of 91. There's this like weird transition period where all the bad boys are like joining the show, and some are writers and joining at different times. But in comes a huge name in Adam Sandler, 277 sketches, good for 63rd all time. And yeah, some really big moments, including, some that are highlighted here on screen. His moments on Weekend Update with his Hanukkah song and Thanksgiving songs. I mean, those are the ones that have been replayed for generations. Opera Man, Cajun Man, Canteen Boy, like all these characters that happened as we really transitioned from one amazing era over to the next. And Adam Sandler became the face of this transition, along with Chris Farley. And it just was a really, really interesting trajectory to see him sort of find his way on the show before we have, essentially one of the weirdest and worst seasons of all time in season 20. And then it is, legend has been told that Sandler was let go at the show, only to go on and have one of the biggest careers in Hollywood in the history of any SNL cast member afterwards. So 26 here is a fascinating place for him. I wonder if it's a little high or very high for someone in terms of what they actually did on the screen. So let's debate that. Thomas, what do you think? Adam Sandler, 26.
I'm actually, for a list like this, I'm surprised that Sandler's not higher than 26.
Ooh, okay.
But not for me. I have him 36 on my list. I think Sandler's somebody whose reputation on the show exceeds what maybe he actually did on the show. He has a lot of memorable moments, and we all loved Sandler for the first few seasons anyway, that season 20. And we should talk about that season 20 because that does contribute to his legacy as well. But he has a handful of really memorable things that just popped. But on the other hand, he was part of a really bad season, and a lot of it was on him. I think Sandler gave in to a lot of his worst instincts in season 20. So did Farley, but that was like a detriment to that show. And John, you talk about if somebody was built in a lab to be on SNL. I don't think Adam Sandler is the type who was built in a lab to be on SNL. I think he
totally agree.
He became popular and did his thing on SNL by force of will, but I don't think he was like made for SNL.
I was going to say the exact same thing, Thomas. You took the words out of my mouth. I really think that Adam Sandler does not check off a box for me as far as somebody who was made for the show. He was made for, producing and, putting together some really funny movies. I don't think that I think he could have had a great career if he wasn't an SNL cast member. But Bill, I could just see you raring to go. So tell us what you think about Sandler.
Listen, I mean, you both make very good points, and that you do have to take responsibility for the fact that you were part of not only 2019 was pretty crappy too. So you have to take responsibility for 2 of the 5 seasons that you were there are considered some of the worst seasons in SNL history. That is not all on him. That the cast was disjointed. There was a lot of really mix and match going on. That being said, I don't know. I maybe not built in a lab, but if you were going to, we've talked about this on superfan takeovers and things like that. If you were going to show somebody who's never seen SNL some clips from history of SNL, Sandler would be in the top 5 of that. I think with Belushi and a couple other people, Will Ferrell. Yes,
What?
you would absolutely show clips of him sitting at the Weekend Update desk, singing the songs, being opera man.
I just want you to think about what you're saying when you say that top 5 people that you would
not
show
top 5
sketches.
cast member. No, not top 5 cast member.
Yeah,
I'm
but
saying,
I know what you're saying, but you're saying that if somebody who didn't like watching SNL or didn't know about SNL and came to you and was like, "Show me some moments from SNL," you're saying Sandler would be in the top 5 moments you would show them?
not top 5 cast members that you would show moments of. So I guess I have to explain that a little bit better.
I don't really agree, but fine, go ahead.
Not like top 5 sketches of all time. No. I'm saying like you would sit down and show them 20 minutes of Sandler or 20 minutes of Belushi, or, just to give them a feel for what the show has been. That's my opinion. Now, all of that being said, I have him at 19. So I think this is a pretty fair place to have him. He is one of the hardest ones to pin down. He really is, because other than his Weekend Update stuff, you've got, the Hurley boy, even, not Martin, but the Hurley boy with Chris Farley. And then the Denise sketches were really good. But there's not a lot of sketch work that you would necessarily point to outside of Weekend Update. So it seems like a fair spot.
Yeah, again, my 3 criteria was, were you meant to be on SNL? Is it clear and obvious that you were built to be there? 2, do you have the metrics to back it up? And as far as the metrics are concerned, he hit a 2.97 SPE. That's pretty low. Like, we're talking about like getting into the top 25 cast members of all time. When you're averaging under 3 sketches an episode, even to the point of like where we're talking about you starting to take over the show, like post Dana Carvey, post Phil Hartman, and your average is still that low for your career, like that's not great. Like it's not like season 20, like he led this cast and sketch appearances. Like, I'm pretty sure if I go back now, that was Michael McKean who led the cast and sketch appearances. Chris Farley was consistently ahead of him. Like, it wasn't like he just like took over the show in any sense. He had some like really strong moments there. Season 16, he comes to the end, so he's 15th overall, 10th overall in season 17, 6th overall in 18, 5th overall in 19, and 4th overall in 20. Look, so I don't think he has the metrics to back it up. I also don't think he was meant for the show. I think he has some really strong moments that have carried through because he's been such a big name that I do think that his moments are replayed in specials like year after year. I would say he goes very high up the list on legacy alone. Legacy is a huge factor to me when you're starting to consider who is the greatest cast member of all time. He is one of the strongest legacies in SNL history. I said this with Bill Murray last week. If Adam Sandler walks into the building today, all the cast members are like, oh my God, it's Adam Sandler. And it's not just because he does movies. It's because he was on SNL and he's had such a big legacy. So I'm not saying he doesn't deserve to be the top 50. I'm not saying he doesn't deserve to be top 40. But 26 to me is a really high for a guy who I don't think dominated the show in any sense of the word. So that's sort of like my perspective on it all. Saying all that, I would love to continue this conversation by talking about some of those moments that could have put him up here on the list. So Thomas, for you, any standout moments from Sandler's career?
Yeah, definitely. Bill had mentioned it, but I want to talk a little bit more about it. It was the Denise show, which I thought was really great. The first one was, I believe, in season 19. That was with Shannon Doherty. And this was Sandler. This is what people love about Sandler. He's like the boy next door, the aw shucks kind of guy. And the Denise show was, he hosted his show, and he would basically, the show was dedicated to his ex-girlfriend. He was having trouble with the breakup, and he had these different segments. And one of the segments was that he would, now's the time where I call Denise and hang up on her. And what I love about Sandler is his delivery just makes it. Like, he could announce what the punchline, like what's about to happen on screen, but the way he does it still makes me laugh. So I'll give Sandler credit. Like, a lot of times he had great timing, and the Denise show was an example of his great timing. He was kind of a, I guess, a aw shucks kind of guy, but then he's like yelled. So you got that like classic Sandler yelling with Phil Hartman as his dad on the other end of the line. So that was probably, just kind of looking at it, aside from the update stuff, I think the Denise show is like classic Sandler to me on SNL.
Yeah, that is a really good sketch. And like, you could see his star power alone when he could carry a sketch and like sit there, talk directly to camera, talk about, his ex-girlfriend or whatever, and people would be calling, and he'd have his own moments like that. And I would feel like if I was at NBC Studio 8H in the 90s, like, Adam Sandler is probably everybody's like favorite person to just like hang out and talk to. But it's just, it translated to like 1 or 2 moments a night. It didn't dominate an episode. And Bill, since you're the highest on Sandler, just would love you to just continue to argue for him and tell us why we're wrong.
Well, I think one of the other intangibles we haven't really mentioned is how much does it hold up? Now, obviously, stuff like topical humor is not going to hold up as well. You can't go back to subjects that only lasted. I was just watching one from 2009 the other night with Balloon Boy, and like, it doesn't hold up. So he didn't do the topical stuff. His stuff holds up, I think. I think that's why he's still a part of almost every holiday best of that SNL does: Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas. And then, I mean, Lunch Ladyland and the Gelfans, the Zagat's reviews, I think, are two of his finer moments away from the desk. If you don't remember the Zagat's reviews, we talked about it on one of the Superfan takeovers as well. It's him and Farley as an old married couple who were looking through a restaurant guide, trying to find a restaurant. And Farley is just overly excited about finding a restaurant in New York City and reading the descriptions. And Sandler wants to kill himself because he hates his wife at this point, and he just can't stand her. And it's such a nice microcosm of that time, of the love that Farley and Sandler had for each other, and how huge they were on the show at that time. So,
yeah, for sure. I agree that they were absolutely huge. I also think another factor here that we briefly mentioned, but have to emphasize, is his ability to turn music into comedy is something that not every cast member could do in the history of the show. Like, be that, triple threat and go out there and just, create moments with music. And you get to see that when Sandler does come back and host in season 44, which is one of the biggest moments, I'd say, in modern SNL history, when the anticipation for will Adam Sandler ever come back to the show, probably close to the Eddie Murphy conversation, but just, will Sandler ever come back? And then he finally does. And he has an amazing hosted episode, culminated with the Chris Farley song, the tribute to Chris. And it's just like these incredible moments. So like I said, for me, like, that the Hanukkah song, like, as a Jew, like, that was such a big thing that we always joked around about. Everybody always played. Like, I thought always that the Hanukkah song was like not from SNL when I was a kid. Like, I thought that was just like a song that just was like played because there were so many Christmas songs out there that like somebody had to make a Hanukkah song. And like, then I found out that was from SNL, and that it was Sandler that was created because of that. And then like he had that idea. So I have to credit him for those things. So there are like a lot of good things to argue for Sandler. I just think that now we're starting to get into some of the greats. And if he came up a few weeks ago, I think I would just be like, this makes sense for him. I just don't know that 26 does without the name recognition bump here. So Thomas, anything else you want to say about Sandler?
Yeah, I'll give this to Sandler. He did something that I wish more cast members even currently would emulate, and that being that he made his bones on Update. I mean, he went on Update as himself, did these songs. He endeared himself to the audience. We got to know Sandler, who he was. He went on Update as character, so he really established himself on that update desk. And I wish more cast members like Michael Longfellow, and he did decent on update last year, but I think the update desk is a good place for like Longfellow or somebody like that. Even Molly Carney, I think they would do well at the update desk. So I think I would like to see more cast members emulate Sandler, and he really worked that update desk and we got to know him because of that.
Bill, any final thoughts on Sandler?
To add on to what Thomas is saying, I mean, 100%. And he made being a Weekend Update correspondent cool. Before him, it was littered with Victoria Jacksons and Al Frankens and things like that. You looked forward. It was appointment viewing to see what Sandler was going to do that weekend on Weekend Update. So the only other thing I'll say is that our unofficial catchphrase of the SNN, you like a juice? Come on.
Yes, that is true. That is that and like Pepper Boy and stuff like that. Like those are the moments that I think are like a little bit more inside, but yes, they are some really, really great moments. Also, just want to say about Rolling Stone, where they had him at 17, right ahead of Rachel, right before Rachel Dratch, actually. So funny that they went back to back on the Rolling Stone list, but right behind her. And they said basically the ultimate love him or hate him guy, Opera Man alone would make him rank high on this list. And I do think Opera Man is a really like memorable character. They said also the Hanukkah song was a major cultural event, which I would agree with. But I just think 17 is very high. I think 26 is high. But ultimately, he is one of those names that I think that for my generation, it was like, oh, wow, Adam Sandler was on SNL. That's insane. I can't wait to go see what he did on the show. And then for today's generation, they're like, Adam Sandler wasn't on SNL. So like, it's like it's starting to like fade away a bit just of how popular he was outside the show. I think this is just a really, really interesting conversation. And I love that the chat is talking about sort of like the legacy of Sandler as far as the Adam Sandler tree that follows him, where we get like Jimmy Fallon sort of in the Sandler vein. We're eventually going to get Pete Davidson as the new resident young person, and everyone's comparing Pete to Sandler. And I think we're going to get some stuff with them together, throughout their times at the show. So I think that is some really cool stuff that we'll see. And I do hope Sandler hosts again. I think that is something that would boost him up my list, is if he was to come back and host a second time, the same way last week we talked about Bill Murray being a 5-timer and all the times he came back. I think that Sandler continues to come back to the show. I do think that increases his legacy there. So those are my thoughts on Adam Sandler here at 26. All right, Bill, are you ready to get into number 25?
I don't know if I'm prepared for this, John, but let's give it a shot.
All right, it's finally time to have this conversation. Let's talk about by far one of my favorite cast members in SNL history, and I know absolutely one of Bill's favorite cast members in SNL history, and I'm sure Thomas as well. We're going to talk about her, the lovely, wonderful, incredible Jan Hooks, here at 25 on the list. She comes onto the show. 5 seasons at the show from 1986 to 1991, 93 episodes, 346 seconds, good for 52nd of all time. She just had such a huge legacy at the show, where SNL was really needing someone like Jan to come in and take over the show for the women at the show. As great as Nora Dunn was at many times, and even Victoria had her moments, Jan Hooks to me was the heart of SNL during that second golden era. And, just if you talk to any of the modern SNL women at the show that really made women have power at the show, they would tell you that their idols were Jan Hooks. Some will say Gilda Radner, but Jan Hooks was certainly a major part of that, because her relationship with Phil Hartman, her ability to be in any sketch, to me, she was like the ultimate like 5-tool player. Like she could do anything at the show. And to me, she is more underrated than I think anyone in SNL history as far as her contributions to the show, and needs to be recognized for them. So here we go. Jan Hooks at 25. Bill Kenny, over to you.
Wow, John, I am, just as the chat is saying as well, I'm glad she's on here, but this is still so criminally low. Like she is so much higher than this. I had her at number 7. She is, I've said it a million times, my favorite cast member of all time. But that has nothing to do with this. When she came into the show in 1986, the women of SNL were treated so terribly for the years after Gilda left, and she reinstalled the comedic woman on SNL. She did that again, not single-handedly, as you said. Nora was great as well. She had so many moments. She was perfect for this cast. She was a part of the second golden era, and she held her own against heavyweights like Phil and Dana and Mike Myers. Yeah, I can't say enough about her. You want to hear me talk about her for an hour and a half? Thomas and I did an SNL Hall of Fame on her last year. She's just amazing. And gone way too soon, obviously. But yeah, as you said, John, I mean, the to a person, every woman who came after her mentions her. Tina Fey, Amy Poehler, Kristen Wiig, all of them said that she was such a huge influence on her, and her 5 years were tremendous. Like, she did so many different things on the show. So I'll stop for
Yeah.
now.
No, well, let's get it. I mean, I love it. We're just ramping up here. We're talking about the great Jan Hooks. So, Thomas, Senna, what are your thoughts? Jan here at 25.
Yeah, I love Jan. Bill, I have her at number 22. I know that's probably a little low for you, but looking at the people I have ahead of her, I stand by it. And I think Jan should be an SNL Hall of Famer. I'm the SNL Hall of Fame guy, one of the SNL Hall of Fame guys, and I do think Jan should be in the SNL Hall of Fame. She's not currently, so let's right that wrong this season, folks. But I have her at 22. I think throughout her tenure, I call her like a somewhat overqualified utility player. And that's not her fault. She was way more talented than that, but I think she probably was in the wrong era of SNL. It was still a little bit of a boys' club. I think she could have had a better career on paper and stood out more and had better recognition with her characters if she had been on SNL late 90s and on. I think she would have been able to do more on the show, but she would always pop on screen when she was there. You got to remember the era, and I just look at her, and she wasn't featured as much in that era relative to a lot of her castmates. Maybe the stats will prove me wrong, but she had a few. We'll probably get to some of her recurring characters. She had a lot of really good one-offs, but I think she was, maybe to no fault of her own, an overqualified utility player. So I think where I have her 22, it felt about right. But certainly she's an all-time great and a Hall of Fame caliber cast member.
I'm probably somewhere in the middle of the two of you. I think 22 is too low, and I think 6 or 7. Would you say, Bill, 7 for you?
Yeah, 7.
Yeah, I think 7 is too high. But that's only because there are so many greats. And I do think that the reason that she wouldn't be 7 or higher for me is just based on the fact that, yes, she has like season 18 where she's going to come back and guest appear a lot. But basically, like, once she's done at the show, she's done at the show. We don't see her come back through any of the next few eras. That is like a factor here when you're considering the totality of the show. I do think her time as like just as a cast member is definitely top 10 potential, though, and I don't have her much lower than top 10. But for me, like, I can't understate this enough. I mean, SNL was a boys club, and really, like, Jan Hooks dominated as a woman on the show. Like, she created sketches that were like female driven. She, like, the Sweeney sisters, I think, are like some of the most underrated characters in SNL history. Like, they're so important in terms of what they did on the show. And I think fundamentally, like, sometimes it's fun to play this game and say, like, in an alternate universe, what does SNL look like if they don't get this cast member on it? And I think you can maybe count 10 to max 15 people that if you pluck them out of the history of the show, SNL as a series is like fundamentally worse. And I think like Jan Hooks just elevated that second era so much that I do believe, like, as great of a character performer and like had amazing impressions, like as all around as amazing of a player as Dana Carvey is, I think, save for Phil Hartman, I think Jan Hooks may be the most important cast member to that era. So for me, like, these things are really important to talk through. 3.55 sketches per episode, so 3.5 sketches, like, that is a very decent number for someone who's going to end up here towards, into the top 25. In terms of sketch appearances, 5th, 4th, 5th. So look, never near the top, but again, you have to remember the era we're talking about. Like, it was very hard. If you put Jan Hooks in the late 20s or early 30s of SNL, Like she is Kristen Wiig, you know. So say like very different personalities, very different cast members, but she takes over the show in a way that the show will celebrate her as like a legend of the show for in terms of its history. And I just believe that it is absolutely crazy that it took her to pass for SNL to give her her due on screen. Like I can't understand that. Like I think that is a wrong that like should have been righted a long time ago. And so for me, like I just think there's so many moments, and you may be saying to yourself, okay, well, I haven't watched that era. What is it about her that made her so great? Well, Bill Kenny and Thomas Senna are two perfect people to tell you some of those moments. So Bill, I'm going to pass it off to you. Tell the listeners why Jan Hooks was so fantastic.
Well, not only did she have so many great impressions, she was the first Hillary, for better or worse. And that's the reason that she came back a lot in season 18 and 19. I think, although, John, you may know better, I think she's the only cast member to ever be credited as a special guest when she came back. But maybe Dan
Ellis
Aykroyd?
in the chat, I see you there. Please let me know, because I think you would know that question. I do have, was Lovitz possibly given that?
I don't think anybody ever was mentioned in the opening credits other than Jan. I could be wrong, but I'm anyway. It's a very small list if there is. But
Aykroyd. Ellis says
yeah,
Aykroyd.
Aykroyd when he was with Goodman, probably, right?
Yeah,
but
good call.
yeah, I mean, and this was the perfect era for slice of life sketches. We always talk about those, how much we hungered for those when they were doing 7 political sketches every night the last few years. She would come in and play the waitress, the hooker, the wife, and she would play it to perfection. One of her best sketches, and it's one of the ones they played when she passed, was Brenda the Waitress with Alec Baldwin. And Nora's fantastic in that as well, and Phil and Kevin. But yeah, she found a way to elevate the material in a way that we very rarely seen on the show. Yeah, just fantastic. Betty Davis, I would also point out too, which is one of the funniest sketches of all time, where she's reading her video will, and technical difficulties occur, and she has to figure her way through it. So yeah, that. Mention 100 more, but she was fantastic.
So many great ones. Thomas, what about you? Any favorites that you want to mention?
Oh gosh, absolutely. That Betty Davis sketch is the sketch we chose to play in full on the SNL Hall of Fame podcast at the end, because she's just so magnetic. Jan was so charismatic. She would just pop on screen. She knew the perfect beats to hit in any given sketch. Jan knew exactly where to be as far as energy, tone, delivery. She was so wonderful. I go back to one of her recurring characters, Dee Kelly from Attitudes. That's what really endeared me to Jan growing up, watching that era of SNL, she and Nora Dunn. And it's hard to talk about Jan without talking about Nora Dunn. They were such a great duo together. But the Attitude sketches, Jan played that perfectly with the sarcastic, feigned interest in the guests. She played like somebody in the chat said she was a good phony, and that was the perfectly said, and that applies to Dee Kelly from Attitudes. Like Jan just knew all the right beats to hit, and I just loved watching her growing up.
Yeah, and like it's a really interesting experiment to go back and watch season 11 of the show and see Nora Dunn without Jan Hooks, and then see Nora Dunn play off of Jan Hooks, to realize how valuable Jan Hooks is. And it's not a slight to Nora, who well deserved was brought back, but you see how much Jan elevates the performers around her when you pair her with other cast members. Like I think she made Phil Hartman as great as he was, and she made like all of the cast members around there as great as they were. So for me, like she's one of the most valuable players in the history of the show by far. I look at some of those moments that are listed here again, like the Sweeney sisters. Those sketches are not online because of music rights, but like if you can Google the right thing, you can find them, because they were, we talked last week about Nick the Lounge Singer with Bill Murray. we're talking about some of like the best musical moments in the history of the show. The fact that you can walk around, they would set up a scene where it would be in a bar or a lounge or whatever, and be communicating with all the patrons that would be in that place. And Jan and Nora just had that personality where they were able to just communicate off of, or really work off of all these different types of people in a way that was so like interesting to watch. And, I just wish that I could have seen her back at the show. Like that is like one of my big things. Like I always said to myself when I watched SNL for the first time, my two biggest questions that I always had as I watched the series were like, why couldn't a Buck Henry come back to host the show again after the original era? And why couldn't we have seen Jan Hooks again post season 18, season 19? Because she was around. Like you see her as Tina Fey's mother in 30 Rock, which is one of the greatest casting choices in the history of sitcoms, I think. You see her on Third Rock from the Sun, where she gets to be there with Jane Curtin. So like for me, I just can't understand for the life of me how SNL didn't find a way to bring her back. And that just is such a shame.
Yeah, John, I know Jan had incredible stage fright, and I'm not sure if that how as she got older through the years, how that impacted her. I would have loved to see her too, but that could have been maybe she wasn't excited to go back and do that necessarily. I know her stage fright really could you wouldn't know it by watching her perform, but she did get very nervous, and I don't know if that maybe made an impact. Hopefully the show invited her back. I would be disappointed if she didn't get invited back.
Yeah, I believe the 30 Rock appearance that Tina had her on was she was about to lose her insurance. I think that at the end of her life, she was having a lot of struggles, and this was a way for her to continue being able to get her health insurance. Yeah, I think she part of it was that she wanted to fade away and not be on it. I like Thomas says, I can't imagine SNL not inviting her back, but you never know. I mean, you don't see Sherry on very much either, so it's a question for the show for sure.
Right. But the difference is that there has been enough, and if Sherry ever wants to come on and talk about this, by all means, but there's been enough reporting out there that Sherry had some issues with some people that worked at the show and really just never wanted to like go back and be a part of that cast, and then sort of time faded, and then it is what it was. But there's been just never an explanation for me about how Phil Hartman's going to come back and host the show twice after he leaves and before he passes, how Jan wasn't a part of those episodes in some way. Dana Carvey's going to come back like a cajillion times. Like I just think that there's like so a weird question mark for me there. But regardless, what an incredible career at the show, and one that I think is deserving of way higher than 25 on the list. And Thomas, any final words you would like to say about the great Jan Hooks?
Yeah, I just wish that she was in an era where they celebrated women more, because I think she would have really popped. And I think Kristen Wiig, that comparison is pretty accurate. She might have become as big as Kristen Wiig if she was in an era that really elevated and supported women. Jan is and was just fantastic. When growing up watching SNL, watching the reruns on Comedy Central, I loved her. She really stood out to me.
Bill, final words on Jan Hooks at 25.
Yeah, everything that's already been said. I mean, do yourself a favor and find clips of her. Like, you will not be disappointed. It all holds up. If you can find the Sweeney Sisters, find the Sweeney Sisters. Find Love is a Dream with Phil. There's a lot of good stuff out there that she's just such a fantastic comedian.
Absolutely. Well, Rolling Stone in SNL 40 had Jan Hooks at 26 at the time, so around the same place where we have her now. But I think it's both wrong. I think Jan Hooks should be higher than that. All right, so look, I told you tonight we're gonna have three cast members that were really, really interesting to talk about in Rachel Dratch, Adam Sandler, and Jan Hooks. I think these conversations are gonna get more interesting as we begin to reveal and get into the top 25 and debate where these final 24 people are. But for now, I want to show you my rankings. This is the point in the show where we get to compare the rankings that the listeners voted with my rankings and where I place them. So here we go. Bill and Thomas, I want your thoughts. These are the rankings. I will read them for the audio listeners to tell you where I placed all of these people. So from the bottom, we have at 26, because we reveal 26 now, Martin Short, David Spade, Bowen Yang, Tracy Morgan. By the way, if you're not watching, Bill Kenny's laughing because he thinks that my slander of Martin Short is hilarious. Tracy Morgan, Ego Odom, and Chevy Chase. Those are into the 20s. From 20 to 11, I got Mikey Day, Sherry O'Terry, Joe Piscopo, Tim Meadows, and here is where I put Adam Sandler. I said to myself today when I was going through this list, I said, can I make an argument why Adam Sandler was a greater cast member than all of the people above him? And I really couldn't. But the people below him, I found a reason why I could argue for them for. So I just felt like when I started doing this or that, that was where Sandler felt for me. 16 on the list so far out of 26. Then I have Seth Meyers, Jimmy Fallon, Taran Killam, Vanessa Bayer, Anna Gasteyer, and here I put Rachel Dratch. Now, Rachel Dratch is at 10, right ahead of Anna and Vanessa. This is the conversation we were having at the beginning of the podcast. I think the list is fluid. I'm willing to make some adjustments if we could sort of have this conversation. I think that Rachel, Anna, and Vanessa all had very similar SNL careers. Maybe I favored Rachel here, maybe not, but I think that's probably the right tier for her. Then Kevin Nealon, Chris Parnell, Bobby Moynihan going into 6 at Beck Bennett. And my top 5 right now is Jane Curtin, John Lovitz, Daryl Hammond, and I put Jan Hooks here at 2, right behind Bill Murray. Look, I said that when Daryl Hammond and John Lovitz were revealed, I felt like they were in their own tier, even Jane Curtin. I think Jan Hooks and Bill Murray are in their own legendary tier. Bill Murray, Jan Hooks, I think you could sort of like find reasons for both, but ultimately I do feel like the legacy of Bill Murray coming back and hosting the show 5 times, being back as many times as he did after he was a cast member, ultimately led me to keep him in the 1 spot versus the 2 spot here. But this is where I put Jan Hooks at 2, Rachel Dratch at 10, Sandler at 16. Bill, your thoughts on my rankings?
Aside from the continued Martin Short slander, which I'm convinced you're the one that started the whole online thing with Martin. Yeah.
I did not.
No. Sandler below Fallon? No, not a chance. But yeah, I mean, Fallon wouldn't exist without Sandler, if we're being fair. But
that's not what this is. They didn't birth him. No. But Fallon had a better career at the show than Sandler.
He basically imitated Sandler until he got an update, but that's neither here nor there. No, I would say your top 10 is pretty solid for sure. I'd probably move a couple around, but yeah, I mean, we're really getting into the nitty gritty now. So,
all right, Thomas, what do you think of where I placed the 3 new cast members?
I think maybe you're probably a little higher on Dratch than I am. I for sure have Anna and Vanessa Bayer ahead of Dratch. I have Sherry O'Terry ahead too. I actually have Sherry O'Terry a lot higher than you do. I think Sherry's very underrated as far as her time at SNL goes. I have, out of all these, I think I would put Sherry in 8th, 9th, something like that.
Wow.
I really think highly of Sherry O'Terry. I would have Vanessa a lot higher than this too. But I think you did a good job. That top 4 to me seems unassailable right now. And I probably split the difference between you and Bill as far as Martin Short goes. I have him near Taran Killam and Rachel Dratch on my list around there. I would put Short around 16th on this list of 26. So Bill might have him a lot higher than I do, but I think you're a bit too low on Martin Short. Especially, I think he needs to be ahead of David Spade and Bowen Yang at the very least.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, look, I think the thing with Sherry is like, except for, let's say, save for Piscopo, Taran Killam, and Beck Bennett, I think everybody's come back to the show. I guess Jane Curtin, we're counting for SNL 40. Yeah, like I think like it's sort of like a legacy thing with Sherry O'Terry, but I probably agree. Maybe I am a little bit low. I am curious from the two of you. Do you think Jan Hooks versus, I know this is a really tough question, but Jan Hooks versus Bill Murray there. Do you think that Jan Hooks should be in my 1 slot versus where I have her now at 2? Bill, what do you think?
Ooh, I can't remember where I had Murray off the top of my head. I think she's a little bit higher than Bill. But again, I think that's a fair spot for her.
Yeah, just taking a look at, I think you DM'd me your list last week. So you had Bill at 17 overall. Oh, so okay, Jan, yeah. So he would be below Jan. What do you think? Bill Murray versus Jan Hooks, Thomas Anna, where are you going to put Jan?
Yeah, I would have Bill Murray number 1 on here right now. I think not too far. I have Bill Murray maybe like 6 spots ahead of Jan, but that's pretty fluid. Like if you could talk me into Jan Hooks being ahead of Bill Murray, absolutely. And I couldn't argue. Once you get to this point, it's like splitting hairs. You know, I think I have probably Jan. I have Daryl Hammond a little bit ahead of Jan, but not by much. But I think having her at 2 seems to be about fair.
Okay, there you go. So we have revealed 25 through 50 on the list. Next week, 24, 23, 22, as we continue the countdown of the greatest cast members of all time. This was such a fun episode, guys. I just really enjoy getting to talk to the two of you and chop it up about these 3 cast members. This exercise has been so much fun, and I love how active our chat was tonight. So thanks for everybody for joining us. Bill Kenny, any final thoughts, and where can the listeners check you out?
Oh, thanks for having me, John. This is such a great list that we're coming up with here, and the fans that have contributed. You can follow me anywhere at BKLove73.
Thank you, Bill. Thomas Senna, you have so much going on in the podcast world. Tell the listeners where they can check you out and everything that you have going on.
I do, yes. A lot going on. Of course, we're in the middle of season 4 at the SNL Hall of Fame podcast. This week, we covered Paul McCartney. So go check that out. Listen to my conversation about Paul McCartney. And on Monday, we are covering Lady Gaga, who honestly has a more interesting case for the SNL Hall of Fame than I even realized. And I'm the one who picked her for the Hall of Fame in our draft. And she has a better case than I even thought. So that's a compelling episode for me. And I do have a new podcast called Pop Culture 5. So it's myself and Jeremy Dove, who's been on with me for Adam McKay and Dick Ebersol in the SNL Hall of Fame. So Jeremy and I started a podcast. Basically, we are finding the 5 essential things, or not the 5 essential, just 5 essential things about any given pop culture topic. So our first episode last week, 5 essential Tom Hanks movies. This week, 5 essential Simpsons episodes. And John, once we start having guests, probably relatively soon, if you want to come on, be our guest, maybe we can do like a 5 essential Friends episodes, something like that.
That sounds fun to me. That sounds like a great time. So it sounds good to me. I got my Central Perk mug with me. So yeah, congrats on the new podcast, Thomas. I'm so excited to get to listen to it. So it sounds like a wonderful time here. And I'm just curious, Thomas, did you go back into the Lady Gaga podcast and talk about her wonderful intro of Bad Bunny?
Yeah, I need to talk to Jamie about how to retroactively insert that. Maybe that could add to her legacy, add to her case. What was it? 7-second appearance. Yeah.
Mike has the numbers. So there you go. All right. Well, as you've heard in the show, it's been a long and crazy week of podcasts, including our Hot Take Show, Roundtable on Monday. Then we had By the Numbers last night, which was really, really great show with Mike and Victoria and Thomas. Today, we released a podcast to the patrons, exclusively for the patrons, an SNL sketch breakdown of The Right Track, where Bill Kenny joined me earlier in the day for that, where we talk through all the moments that happened throughout our Waffle House reprise. So that is available exclusively for the patrons, and we're going to do that each and every week for you as you vote for the sketch that you want us to talk about in that extra show. After this show, the greatest cast members of all time, we are back on Saturday to talk about Nate Bargatze and the Foo Fighters for the Hot Take Show live at 1:10 a.m. And we're going to do it all over again next week. And we could not do this all without your support. So please subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Make sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X to check out everything we are doing here at the SNN. All right. On behalf of Bill Kenny and Thomas Senna and everybody in the chat who joined us on this Thursday night, my name is John Schneider from the SNN. We will see you next time, everybody. Have a good one.